they stole everything from my family. I was just a boy, hiding behind a wall, but I made a promise to myself after watching them laugh and oppress my family. This is the story of Jackson. From nothing to everything and back to nothing again. But was it pride or circumstances? Stay tuned to discover the tragic fall of the wolf soldier, General Jackson. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Jackson was born on a cold night in a small, broken hut at the edge of his village. His mother was already tired from raising 11 other children, and his father carried the weight of poverty on his shoulders. There was no celebration when he came into the world, only quiet acceptance. The house they lived in barely held the family together. The roof leaked whenever it rained, the floor was made of dirt, and the air was heavy with the smell of smoke from their cooking fire. Still, his mother held him tight, as if love alone could protect him. Nobody in that hut knew that this child, the last born of 12, would carry a story that people would tell for years. To them, he was just another child born into hardship. To fate, he was the beginning of something bigger. Life in Jackson's family was a daily fight against hunger. Clothes were old and torn. Most of the children went barefoot. The family barely survived one day before worrying about the next. Poverty followed them everywhere like a shadow they could not escape. Despite all this, they stayed together. They shared what little they had, even if it meant each person only got a bite. Jackson grew up in this struggle, watching his family suffer, and his young mind began to see the world as a place where survival meant everything. In their village, there was a group of powerful men who controlled almost everything. They wanted Jackson's father to join them in their evil deeds, but he refused and preferred to keep his dignity, even if it meant being poor. His refusal came at a cost. The men began to target him quietly. They mocked his poverty, and their laughter followed him around. For them, his no was an insult. At home, he would sit by the doorway each evening, staring into the distance, his mind heavy with thoughts. The children didn't understand it at the time, but Jackson would later realize that his father was fighting a war he couldn't win. One night, the villagers finally acted. Under the cover of darkness, they came together and stormed Jackson's home. They took everything the family owned, the goats, the farm tools, the little land they farmed on. Their laughter cut through the night like a cruel reminder that power belonged to them. Jackson's father stood there, unable to fight back. He didn't have the strength or the support. His hands shook, but he stayed silent, watching as his hard work was carried away piece by piece. For the family, this was the moment everything collapsed. Jackson was just a boy, but he saw it all. He was hidden behind a wall, watching the villagers steal their future. The fear and anger that built inside him that night never left. It planted a seed that would grow as he got older. After that night, life became even worse. With no land to farm and no animals left, the family had almost nothing. They depended on scraps, and every day felt heavier than the one before. Poverty was no longer a struggle. It became their way of life. At night, when everyone else slept, Jackson stayed awake. He thought about the future, even though he was still a child. He didn't cry or complain like the others. He simply watched and held the memory of that night inside him. That memory became the fuel that shaped the man he would become. At night, when the fire burned low, Jackson's grandmother told stories to the children. One story stayed in his mind more than the rest. It was about wolves, animals that never betrayed their family, that stayed loyal to one partner, that helped their parents even in old age. She said wolves were stronger than dogs because they could not be tamed. They thought for themselves, made their own plans, and never bowed to anyone. Jackson listened closely. Even though he was still young, he felt a strange connection to the story. The story of the wolf gave him hope. In a world that had taken everything from him, the wolf became a picture of survival. Quietly, he began to imagine himself as one of them, strong, loyal, and unbroken. Every day after the theft was a fight to survive. His siblings worked in other people's farms for little pay, while his mother tried to feed them from almost nothing. Jackson followed them into the fields, carrying heavy loads even though he was small. His body grew tough faster than most boys his age, shaped by work and suffering. He learned how to hide his hunger and keep moving, even when his stomach was empty. The family's future looked dark, but Jackson's eyes burned with quiet determination. As the years passed, the weight of poverty crushed Jackson's siblings. One after another, they dropped out of school. Some left the village to look for work. Others gave up on education completely. The dream of becoming something more was slowly buried under hardship. Jackson saw it all and carried it deep inside. He realized that if he didn't fight for something bigger, he would end up the same way. Their dreams were gone, but he began to build his own. Even though Jackson was the youngest, he began to act differently. He stood up for his sisters when other boys tried to take advantage of them. He fought older kids when they mocked his family. Slowly, people began to notice that he wasn't like the rest. One morning, Jackson left the village with almost nothing. His clothes were torn, and his feet were bare, but his decision was made. He was going to join the military. His mother cried as she watched him go, but he didn't look back. To him, this was not just leaving home, it was leaving behind weakness. As he disappeared down the dusty path, the boy of 12 children became something else. He was no longer just the last son of a poor family. He was a boy walking toward a future that would change everything. When Jackson reached the military camp, the first thing he felt was pain. The drills were endless. They pushed him through mud, forced him to crawl under barbed wire, and shouted until his ears rang. Many recruits broke down and left, but Jackson kept going. Each drop of sweat reminded him of the hunger and shame he had left behind in his village. He told himself he would never go back the same way he came. Days turned into weeks, and Jackson adapted. His body grew stronger, and the pain that once crushed him became part of his routine. Where others saw torture, he saw transformation. The poor boy was slowly becoming a soldier. Jackson remembered his grandmother's story of the wolf. He carried it in his heart. He worked in silence, stayed loyal to his team, and never showed weakness. That made him stand out. The wolf in him grew. Just like the animal that never bows, Jackson became untamed. He could follow orders, but deep inside, he remained his own man. The military was shaping him, but he was also shaping himself. Jackson's first real battle came faster than he expected. The training camps turned into a front line when war broke out. He was thrown into a truck with other young soldiers and sent into the unknown. The sound of gunfire was the first thing that welcomed them. Fear spread quickly among the new recruits. Some froze, others panicked. Jackson felt fear too, but he forced himself to move. He remembered the hunger, the nights of watching his father lose everything. Compared to that, death didn't scare him as much. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke, blood, and cries filled the air. Jackson survived that day, not because he was stronger than others, but because he refused to give up. For him, retreat was not an option. One night, his unit was ambushed. The attack came suddenly, and many soldiers scattered. Jackson found himself in the dark, surrounded by gunfire. The leaders were gone, and panic took over the group. But Jackson stayed calm. He guided a few soldiers through the night, finding a safe path out of danger. His decisions saved lives that evening. When they regrouped, the commanders realized he had done something rare for a recruit. He had led when everyone else had run. From that night, his name began to spread. He was no longer just another soldier. The commanders noticed him. Promotions came slowly, but they came. Each rank lifted him higher, away from the life of poverty that once defined him. Jackson was no longer just a survivor. He was becoming a leader. Jackson's courage and discipline soon earned him his first medal. It was handed to him in front of hundreds of soldiers. The crowd clapped, but Jackson stood still, his face calm, his heart quiet. For many, it was a dream come true. For him, it was only the beginning. The medal did not erase his memories. Behind the polished uniform, Jackson still carried the image of his father's helpless face the night the villagers stole everything. The medal reminded him that he was climbing, but it also reminded him of what he was climbing for. Every time he touched it, he thought not of glory, but of justice. He wasn't fighting only for his country. He was fighting for a boyhood scar that had never healed. These thoughts pushed him harder, made him train longer, and prepared him for the day he would finally return and take revenge. Years passed before Jackson finally returned to his village. But this time, he did not come as a poor boy. He came with stars on his chest and soldiers behind him. The same villagers who once mocked his family now whispered his name in fear. The walk back into the village was heavy with silence. People came out of their homes, watching him pass. The boy who once begged for scraps was now a man wrapped in power. Every step announced that the wolf had returned to his den. Jackson did not smile. His face carried no joy. This was not a visit. This was a reckoning. He wasted no time. The men who had stolen from his father were dragged out and thrown into chains. Their laughter from years ago was gone. Now they bowed their heads, powerless before the boy they once humiliated. Jackson reclaimed the land, the tools, and everything that had been taken. For his family, it was a moment of triumph. The balance had shifted. Justice, at least in his eyes, had finally been served. The village trembled. Some celebrated him, others feared him. But no one doubted that Jackson had become something more than just a soldier. He was power, walking on 2 feet. When Jackson took back his father's land, the family held a feast. For the first time in years, food filled the table. Neighbors gathered to watch, and laughter returned to the house that had once known only hunger. His parents smiled proudly. His siblings, though worn out from years of suffering, felt a new kind of hope. They looked at Jackson not just as their brother, but as their protector. The family finally tasted what it meant to live without fear. For Jackson, the feast was more than just a celebration. It was proof that his journey from a barefoot boy to a decorated soldier had meaning. He had not forgotten where he came from. He had come back to give his family the dignity that was once stolen. The joy did not last long. Only weeks after the feast, one of Jackson's siblings fell sick suddenly. The sickness was strange, fast, and unforgiving. Before anyone understood what was happening, death entered the house. The village whispered. Some said it was natural, but others said it was not. They claimed the enemies Jackson had punished were still fighting, not with chains this time, but with something darker. Before the family could recover, another sibling died. The sickness returned like a shadow, silent and merciless. The house of 12 began to shrink, one coffin at a time. Jackson buried his pain in silence. He had fought in wars, seen men fall around him, but nothing compared to watching his own blood leave the world. He carried his grief quietly, but the fire in his eyes grew colder. Around the village, fear spread. People spoke in low tones, saying Jackson's family had been cursed. Every new death seemed to confirm it. One evening, a group of old men came to see Jackson. They told him plainly that the deaths were not ordinary. The villagers he punished were using powers beyond the reach of soldiers and guns. They warned him that if he ignored it, more tragedy would follow. Jackson listened, but his face showed no fear. To him, these were just stories. He had faced bullets, bombs, and battles. He could not believe that unseen forces could harm him or his family. The elders left, shaking their heads. They had done their part, but they knew Jackson's pride was standing in the way of his survival. Jackson dismissed the warnings. He believed in strength, discipline, and weapons, not in superstitions. To him, death was part of life, and grief was just another battle to endure. He continued living as if nothing was wrong, but the signs were all around him. His family was shrinking, his house was quieter, and his nights were colder. Yet, he refused to change his path. The deaths of Jackson's siblings broke his parents. His mother, once strong enough to hold 12 children together, became frail. Her face lost its light, and her body carried the weight of grief. His father, who had once stood firm against the villagers, now looked like a shadow of himself. They watched their children vanish one by one, powerless to stop it. The land that had been returned to them brought no joy. It stood like a reminder that even wealth and power could not bring back what had been lost. In time, both parents gave in to the sorrow. One after the other, they passed away quietly, leaving Jackson alone to bury them. Their graves stood beside his siblings, a line of silence where once there had been life. After his parents' deaths, Jackson found himself truly alone. The boy who once grew up surrounded by 11 brothers and sisters now stood in an empty compound. The house that once held laughter and arguments was quiet, filled only with echoes. Jackson became a wolf without a pack. He had survived battles, risen above hunger, and crushed his enemies. But in the end, he was left to face the silence of his own success. Not long after, sickness came for Jackson himself. It was sudden, without warning, and unlike anything he had faced before. At first, he thought it was just exhaustion from his long years of service, but his body grew weaker each day. Doctors came, but none could explain what was happening. His strength faded, his hands shook, and the once unbreakable soldier found it difficult to even stand. It was as if his body was surrendering to an unseen enemy. For the first time, Jackson felt fear. Not the fear of bullets or bombs, but the fear of something he couldn't fight, something that slipped through every defense he had built. As the sickness grew worse, Jackson began to dream. In his sleep, he saw wolves, standing tall, staring at him with unblinking eyes. They did not attack him, but they did not leave either. They seemed to question him in silence. The dreams came every night. Sometimes the wolves stood in a circle around him. Sometimes only one appeared, staring directly into his eyes. Each time, he woke with sweat on his face, feeling both comforted and haunted. Jackson began to wonder if his grandmother's story was more than just a tale. Perhaps the wolf had been a guide all along, and now, in his final days, it had returned to remind him of something he had forgotten. Jackson fought the sickness as if it were war. He tried medicines, he tried strength, he tried to push his body beyond its weakness. But nothing worked. Every effort only showed him how powerless he truly was. The man who had once commanded soldiers and led men through gunfire was now bedridden. His breath came slow, his body thin. Outside, his soldiers stood guard, but even they could not protect him from what was inside. It was his final battle. But unlike every other war he had fought, this one gave him no weapons, no armor, and no victory to claim. As Jackson's sickness spread, the village spoke in hushed tones. People said it was not a normal illness. They believed the villagers he once punished had called upon forces too dark to fight with guns. His men had followed him through wars, but this was different. This enemy left no tracks, no sound, no target to aim at. They could only watch as their leader wasted away. Jackson's home, once filled with life, became silent. The land he fought to reclaim stood empty, its fields untouched. The compound carried the weight of loss. Graves lined the ground, and the air felt heavy with absence. Each day, Jackson grew weaker. He could no longer walk without help. His body had once been like iron, but now it felt like glass. Every breath was an effort. One night, the sickness struck harder than ever before. His chest burned, his body shook, and he felt the weight of death pressing down. He closed his eyes and saw shadows moving around him. The wolves from his dreams returned, circling him. This time they did not stand still. They moved closer, their eyes glowing in the dark. Jackson felt as if they were guiding him somewhere. When he woke, he knew the end was not far. There were no doctors, no soldiers, no family left to surround him. Only silence. The same silence that had followed him through battles and victories now waited at his side. For hours, he lay between life and death, his mind drifting in and out, until finally he died. When the news spread, the village stood still. Jackson, the boy who rose from hunger to power, was gone. Some mourned, some felt relief, and some whispered that it was justice. His soldiers buried him beside his parents and siblings. The graves formed a circle, like a pack reunited in death. The land he fought for became his final resting place. The villagers said it was the end of an era. The wolf who had returned to claim his den had finally fallen. Even in death, Jackson's name carried weight. The villagers told stories about him, how he rose from nothing, how he fought wars, how he returned with power. His life became a legend, retold around fires at night. But his story was also a warning. Many said his pride kept him from listening, that his belief only in strength blinded him to other battles. Children grew up hearing of Jackson as both a hero and a lesson. People often ask themselves what could have been done differently. Could Jackson have listened to the elders? Could he have sought another kind of protection for his family? Could he have balanced power with wisdom? The questions remained unanswered, but they kept the story alive. Jackson's rise and fall became a mirror for anyone who thought strength alone was enough. His story became not just about victory, but about the cost of ignoring the unseen battles of life. Jackson's story is not just about him. It is about every person who faces the choice between pride and humility, strength and wisdom. His life ended too soon, but the lessons remain. If you were Jackson, what would you have done differently to avoid this sad ending? Would you have listened to the warnings, or would you have stood firm in your pride? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Jackson's story is over, but the conversation is only beginning.